Octavius Valentine Catto lived February 22nd, 1839 to October 10th, 1871. He was a Republican American, educator, intellectual, civil rights activist. He was a great leader. I was walking around Penn Square today, City Hall in Philly, and I never got to walk up and look at this statue of Mr. Catto, and it's pretty awesome. It's pretty awesome. The words on the statue are pretty powerful, so I figured I would do a little thing about him tonight. Just a little tidbit to understand more about him. You do need to understand the context of that time in America, that time in Pennsylvania, that time in Philly, because there was a ton of shit going on. But I won't be long, and people's attention spans aren't that long these days, so I'll leave the backstories for another time.
Black men are 2.5 times more likely to be killed by cops than white men.
They don't want us to succeed.
How much more do we have to take?
So Octavius Catto was a Republican American educator, intellectual, civil rights activist in Philly. He became principal of male students at the Institute for Colored Youth, otherwise known as ICY. He had also been educated there. He was born free in Charleston, South Carolina, in a prominent mixed race family. He moved north as a boy with his family and became educated and served as a teacher, becoming active in civil rights. He also was known as a top cricket and baseball player. He kind of became a martyr to racism when he was shot and killed in election day violence by Democrats, nonetheless, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But where ethnic Irish people of the Democratic Party, which was anti-Reconstruction and had opposed black suffrage, attacked black men to prevent their voting for Republican candidates. In 1859, he was elected a full member and recording secretary of the Banneker Institute, which was formerly known as ICY. He also was hired as a teacher of English and mathematics at the school. And then on May 10th of 1864, he delivered a commencement address there, which gave a historical synopsis of the school, which is important given that it's the first high school for black youth in the country. Although there were schools that admitted African Americans preceding it, in addition, Catto's address touched on the issue of the potential insensitivity of white teachers towards the needs and interest of black students. And so he said, "It is at least unjust to allow a blind and ignorant prejudice to so far disregard the choice of parents and the will of the colored taxpayers. as so to appoint over colored children white teachers whose intelligence and success measured by the fruits of their labors could neither obtain nor secure for them positions which we know would be more congenial to their tastes. Catto also spoke of the Civil War then in progress. He believed that the United States government had to evolve several times in order to change. A man far ahead of his time. He understood that the change must come, not necessarily for the benefit of blacks, but more for America's political and industrial welfare. This would be a mutual benefit for all Americans. It is for the purpose of promoting, as far as possible, the preparation of the colored man for the assumption of these new relations with intelligence and with the knowledge which promises success, that the Institute feels called upon at this time to act more with energy and on a broader scale than has heretofore been required. On January 2nd, 1865, at a gathering at the National Hall in Philadelphia to celebrate the second anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation, Catto delivered a very able address and one that was a credit to the mind and heart of the speaker. In 1869, Catto was elected as the principal of the ICY's mail department. In 1870, Catto joined the Franklin Institute. For those who are local to the Philadelphia area, it's still a very prominent center for science and education. And at the time, the white leaders supported Catto's membership despite his race. And in the face of some opposition as well. Catto served as principal and teacher at ICY until his death in 1871. But the Civil War increased Catto's activism for abolition and equal rights. He joined with Frederick Douglass and other black leaders to form a recruitment committee to sign up black men to fight for the Union and emancipation. And after the Confederate invasion of Pennsylvania in 1863, Catto helped raise a company of black volunteers for the state's defense. Their help, however, was refused, but acting with Douglass and the Union League, Catto helped raise 11 regiments of United States colored troops in the Philly area. These men were sent to the front and saw much action. Catto was commissioned as a major, but he didn't fight. But he fought fearlessly for the desegregation of Philadelphia's trolley car system. The May 18th, 1865 issue of the New York Times ran a story discussing the civil disobedience tactics employed by Catto as he fought for civil rights. And this was from May 17th at 2 p.m. Last evening, a colored man got into a Pine Street passenger car and refused all entreaties to leave the car, where his presence appeared to be not desired. The conductor of the car, fearful of being fined for rejecting him, as was done by the judges of one of our courts in a similar case, ran the car off the track, detached the horses, and left the colored man to occupy the car all by himself. The colored man still firmly maintains his position in the car, having spent the whole night there. The conductor looks upon the part he enacted in the affair as a splendid piece of strategy. The matter creates quite a sensation in the neighborhood where the car is standing, and crowds of sympathizers flock around the colored man. A meeting of the Union League of Philadelphia was held in Sansom Street Hall on Thursday, June 21st, 1866, to protest and denounce the forcible ejection of several black women from Philadelphia streetcars. Later enlisting the help of Congressman Thaddeus Stevens, and William D. Kelly, Catto was instrumental in the passage of a Philadelphia bill that prohibited segregation on transit systems in the state. Publicity about a conductors being fined who refused to admit Catto's fiance to a Philadelphia streetcar helped establish the new law in practice. Catto's crusade for equal rights was capped in March 1869 when Philadelphia voted to ratify the 15th Amendment, which prohibited discrimination against citizens in registration and voting based on the race, color, or prior condition. Effectively, it provided suffrage to Black men. No women then at the time could vote. It was fully ratified in 1870. But on election day, October 10th, 1871, Catto was teaching. Fights broke out in the city between Black and white voters. As the election was high in tension and parties reflected racial opposition, Black voters, and this is what I wanted to fill y'all in on, at the time were Republican for the most part. White voters at the time, or mostly ethnic white voters as they called them, Irish, Italians, were Democrat. Black voters faced intimidation and violence from white voters, especially ethnic Irish, who were partisans of the city's democratic machine. Irish immigrants had entered the city in great numbers during and after the Great Famine of the 1840s. They competed with free Blacks for jobs and housing. City police were called on to quell the violence, but instead, often ethnic Irish people themselves, they exasperated the problems using their power to prevent Black citizens from voting. A Lieutenant Haggerty was later arrested for having encouraged police under his command to keep Blacks from voting. On his way to vote, Catto was continuously harassed by whites. Police report indicate that he had purchased a revolver for protection. At the intersection of Knife and South Streets, Catto was accosted by Frank Kelly. And if you look him up, there's a whole story about him. I'd love to do an episode on him because he plays a significant role in Philadelphia history. And he was kind of like Catto's arch nemesis. Catto was shot 3 times by Frank Kelly and died of his wounds. The city inquest was not able to determine if Catto had pulled his own gun, and Kelly was never convicted of assault or murder. He actually was catapulted in basically like local superstardom and mafia. He basically essentially started the mafia in Philly. Catto's military funeral at Lebanon Cemetery in Passyunk was well attended. The murder of Catto, who was an important leader, and violence throughout the election, coupled with the resurgence of the anti-Reconstruction Democratic Party in the city, marked the beginning of a decline in Black militancy in 19th century Philadelphia. Later, after the cemetery was closed down, Catto's remains were reinterred at Eden Cemetery in Collingdale. On June 17th, 1878, R.W. Wallace, a biographer of Catto, wrote to the Christian Recorder questioning why no one was taking care of Catto's grave. Can you inform me, through your paper, why there is no care taken care of Professor O.V. Catto's grave? I have recently been down to the cemetery and was surprised to see its condition. Thousands of people have asked me about the same thing, and when I am compelled to say there is no sign of any stone to his grave, while both white and colored stand ready to help in the matter, it is not credible to us. Something ought to be done in the matter. I believe almost everybody would give something toward getting a stone. I am the publisher of his life and am prepared to speak in regard to the interest taken by all classes of people. Some 20 years later, the New York Times reported, many Negro citizens of Philadelphia are now endeavoring to have carried into speedy execution a long cherished wish to have erected there a monument of Professor Octavius V. Catto, one of their race, who was killed in an election day riot that the city had 26 years ago. He was a long an instructor in the Institute for Colored Youth, and the plan is to erect a mausoleum, and that the work be done by the pupils of the school as far as possible. Lebanon Cemetery was a black cemetery in Philly, established in 1849. It was one of the only two private black cemeteries in Philly at the time. Lebanon Cemetery was condemned in 1899 and closed in 1903. The bodies were reinterred in 1902 at Eden Cemetery in Collingdale. So that's how he ended up there. The former location of the cemetery is now the street corner of 19th and Snyder in South Philly. Lebanon Cemetery was created on June 24th, 1849, and it was a non-sectarian cemetery designated for blacks since they were excluded from most of the new rural cemeteries. Several hundred black veterans of the U.S. Civil War were buried in a reserved section of Lebanon Cemetery. Octavius Catto was a powerful leader whose life was cut very short. And many don't even know who he is. But he lived during a time of great transformations and in some ways was quite ahead of his time. I hope you all do more researching on Catto. I know I will. I saw this one documentary about Philly that Catto was featured in that was great, but it left me wanting more. So going to see the statue of him today, it definitely reignited my interest in Catto's life all over again. Well, I hope I gave you enough information on Catto that you're able to see what kind of guy he was. Hell, he could be your ancestor. You don't know. But that power, that fire that he had, it's in all of us. Octavius Valentine Catto lived February 22nd, 1839 to October 10th, 1871.